um, the discipline window, a strategy for self-care. I'm very excited um, because at the Positive School Center, we've been working, um, and our fearless leader, Shantae, has been continually setting a true north for us in terms of how we engage in this heartfelt work. Some people call it hard. In the restorative world, we say heartfelt. And we're going to be grounded in our newest branding piece. It's called Creative Learning Communities, grounded in the research by Sean Ginwright, Healing Centered Engagement. And this particular model gives us an opportunity to look at how Shantae frames it, how we can become more competent adults. And we frame it inside of um, being socially and emotionally developed, looking at our SELs, not only from the vantage point of looking at the value add for children, but also the value add for adults. How we become more trauma responsive by being aware of the adverse childhood experiences and the adverse community environments. And then looking at it from a racial justice and equity lens and understanding social engineered trauma, and how, when we look at creating a space of power from the community, it opens up a place for voice for people to show up. And that gets us to restorative approaches, where we're going to be spending some time today looking at the social discipline window. Just a slight survey or polling. If you have been trained or familiar with restorative approaches, can you type a 1 in the box? Or you can raise your hand, because we'll be looking at that. And we have a very small and intimate group today, and it's a request that if you are not in a school, you may be in a school, you might be doing a dismissal, you might be doing a number of different things. If you are able to, it's an invitation to turn your cameras on. With the social discipline window, we're looking at the community aspect and the sharing, and also being able to see folks enriches and creates a background of relatedness. How you be able to participate today, we always say stay engaged. I would say engagement is the combination of participation and attention. And when we bring those things, we get this magic thing called connection. Please speak your truth. And that's just being fully self-expressed. Whatever is there for you right on the tip of your tongue, just generate that and share that. Please understand that what you share will be a major contribution to this group, and because it's going to be going down to posterity, it'll be something that it'll be shared with many others who get an opportunity to view this. And I don't want to now get you all nervous, like, oh, I got to say the right thing. We're not looking for the right thing. Just share what's right there. And you may have been sitting down all day. You may have been on your feet. Whatever you need to do in terms of spatial comfort, physical comfort, do whatever that you need to do to take care of yourself. And with the system of restorative practices, whenever we reach a new peak and we are bending over and breathing because we've done so much great work and put in so much effort, and we look up, there's a new mountain peak to climb. And in the world of improvement science, we're continuously improving and developing and training and developing ourselves. So I just want to thank you all for taking the time out to put yourself in that space. And we're going to be doing a lot of moving today. We only have we're not only, we have 75 minutes and looking to be real efficient with the time. What we're going to be doing is answering what the social discipline window is, and then we're going to share how you use this tool as a self-awareness tool, to be able to start thinking about self-care for yourself. Some of you are sort of put ones in a box, which meant you're familiar with restorative practices, you've been trained. I also want to share that in these 75 hours, 75 minutes, we are going to just literally scratch the tip of the iceberg. I don't want you walking away thinking that you're going to get this, very enriched and very deep process around a 2-day, 14-hour training. We're going to just cut a slice out of this pie, look at the social discipline window, and see how we can use this around increasing self-awareness and being able to take care of ourselves a little more. Yesterday, you all, if you were here yesterday, we were looking at uh, circles beyond the classroom, and Nakoma did an excellent job in sharing some alternative ways that we can utilize, again, these tools and expand it beyond what we're doing in the classroom, and how we can have these things at our um, ready to hand to utilize not only professionally but personally as well, and whatever aspects of our lives that we're engaged in. And one of the fundamental components that we look at is something called the 4 V's. Um, Restorative practice is about building relationships, and there's a risk when we share ourselves, right? How am I going to be looked at? Am I going to say the right thing? And inside of that vulnerability, when we lean into it, we show up in a very big way. And then we start to discover and rediscover some aspects of our voice. And then the validation is really connection. We're making those connection points in our community. And when that happens, the value, collective and connective value expands and enhances. And that a social capital of I becomes us and us becomes we. And, we're looking at a mission or whatever else we're looking to create between us. I'm not here to talk to you or at you. If at any point, if you have a question, um, you can raise your virtual hand. We have a moment for questions and answers at the back end of this session. But we're going to be I'll be asking you some questions as well in between. So fundamentally, restorative practices and approaches is about being very proactive and creating an environment, an ecosystem to build relationships. And relationships just don't come out of thin air. They don't just happen. There's something that we do that allows us to show up in a space, be present, be intentional, um, and have an atmosphere that is malleable for other people to show up to begin connecting those dots and have that level of validation. And the International Institute for Restorative Practices says people are very happy and engaging in relationships when people in power and authority, or just when people when we engage with are working with us, acknowledging, recognizing, creating that space that says I belong, and they're doing that with us rather than to us or for us. How many of you, you know, like to be told what to do? Who likes to have things done to you, right? If you do, raise your hand, right? And if you don't, you're a prime candidate for this restorative practice space. When we're in these with spaces and we're building relationships, whether it's personally or professionally, there's uh, brain science and neurological research now that shows that there is a whole biological connection that's happening. It's the neurons, it's the synapses that are firing, it's the hormones, and it's a magical thing that has us begin to telework or to telecommunicate how we're being in the space. Very creative, very transformative spaces. And they say oxytocin gets released. Um, that's saying that we feel good and creates those attachments. Dopamine begins to stimulate the reward system and the noradrenaline. This comes out of from a work from um, I think her last name is Dupree, but it's called Social Emotional Learning in the Brain. Um, I cannot think of her name right now. Oh, it's right there on the page. Marley Springer, excuse me. Um, she was an educator over 20 years, and then she went and got some additional advanced degrees and found herself in a world of neuroscience. And she took her chocolate and peanut butter and wrapped them together and has a very well researched book. So that gets us to the social discipline window and why this is very important. We're talking about creating belonging spaces for folks. The social discipline window gives us an opportunity to identify patterns and behavior, and it allows us to do it with us first. So we create a level of self-awareness. But what's very significant about the social discipline window, we first have one axis that we're looking at. And the International Institute for Restorative Practices calls it the control arm, where it's limit setting and discipline. I like to say it's the accountability arm, and the accountability provides a space of structure, which is where that discipline comes in. And then the second component is the support and nurturing space, where we're looking to take that accountability structure and then couple it with nurturing, compassion, and empathy. And what do you think happens when we have an environment that has a high level of accountability and a high level of compassion and empathy? You all can type this in the chat, and you can even, if you feel courageous enough, come off mic and say what you think an environment might be like where there's high accountability. And I'll even add guidance in there. Accountability, guidance, and structure coupled with support, encouragement, and nurturing. Who would like to share? Did we have anything coming up in the chat? Well,
But I would say, but I can come off of mute, but I would say we could let someone go. I think a lot of that I think about like myself when I'm in my best mode of parenting, but you're like children have the routines to be able to follow directions and know what they need to do. Like they're clearing their plates from the table without having to be told, because they know what to expect, and that they're able to do that independently. That comes from.
And even from a professional standpoint, myself, Emily, Shantae, we were in a classroom as well. I just shortened my bio. When I showed up with my lesson plan and the structure very laid out, my attention can move away from those details because I had those laid down, and I can I can penetrate and generate myself more into the classroom and pick up on those subtleties of a raised eyebrow or mm-hmm. Like I was completely present and in the space. So it makes a difference even for the individual as well. When we think about the social discipline window, the first quadrant was the 2 quadrant, and this is where someone is high in control and low in support. If you were to think of a one-word descriptor for someone who was high in control and low in support, and you can type this in the chat box, what might one word would you come up with? Someone who's high control and low in support. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to keep moving because the time's of the essence. We say, and if someone types something, Emily, you can just share it out. We say that the person who's high, well, the International Institute of Restorative Practices says the person that demonstrates high control and low support is someone that's punitive. And that is someone that I typically say is, and I'm a self-proclaimed two boxer, right? Um, very much authoritative when I was in the classroom. And there can be other characteristics, maybe a tyrant or a dictator, you know. And some some teachers that I knew, were even, quiet assassins. Like they just they chopped it, they chopped up the classroom and went on ahead, right? Um, but when there's stress, the person may show up in a fight mode. And I'm now talking about fight, flight, because I'm going to leading towards how we're going to think about this for um, looking at self care. And I was doing some reading out of Van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps Score. When those stressful situations show up and we're in fight mode, there may be certain ways of being that we operate that are deleterious, or zap our vitality in some way. We're going to get to looking at what some of those may be. The
We did
second,
have some folks in the chat who were dropping into that, like a micromanager,
yeah,
an aggressive tone.
yeah,
Dictator was coming up. I was also thinking about the kind of the person that you have that you work with or for that's kind of never satisfied. Like their best is never enough. Was
oh
something that
yeah,
came up.
oh yeah, oh yeah. And then when we have the bottom right quadrant, we have someone who's lower control and high support, and we say this person does things for people. What might one word you think of when you're thinking of someone who is low in control and high in support? And while you're thinking, you can type that in the chat as well. We say that person is permissive. And when the anxiety and stress builds up, and these are not like tried and true or absolutes, you know, this person may show up in a flight mode. So there's avoidance, right? Um, they might be doubtful in some way, um, running away from a situation, not literally running away, but kind of just backing a withdrawal in some senses. And just like I said with the chicken, I mean, just like I said with the ninja, just want to kind of put a little humor in there. There may be some chicken spaces, right? Where, I may chicken out of a situation and not really take something head on. And when we look at the bottom left quadrant, we say that someone who has low control and low support,
I'm
they
going to jump in real fast, Andre. We have some really great answers in the chat for that permissive block.
Mhm.
Some of those looking at someone that's an enabler. Sometimes, sorry, I just lost it for a moment. Sorry. An enabler. Someone had service providers can be ... which I was also going to jump in as just a social worker and I think a lot of early career teachers sometimes can fall into this. That they're disorganized, a lack of vision, or a failure to share that vision and expectations. And then finally, also passive coming
Yeah,
into.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Emily. And then we have here the left quadrant, someone who's low in control, low in support. We say that they're in the not box or neglectful. What we have done, again, with that very first slide, that second slide that I showed you around healing centered engagement, um, or healing learning communities, we know that these boxes are not absolute and hard and fast. And when we allow for our humanity to show up, if I were to be honest and insightfully straight with myself, I may orbit within these three boxes, depending on the time of day or what circumstance I may be facing, right?
Hey,
And
buddy, I got you some mud.
thank you so much, Miss Williams. Um, and this person is in the freeze point. So there's fight, flight, and freeze, right? And they may show up, the person that's in this area, that's in low control and low support, you know, could be very resigned about something. You know, you ever met the person that's that the apocalyptic person? It's not worth doing anything, so why should I? Right? Or they're kind of like arms folded. And it could be very tired or exhausted. Or the one that I really like is I don't wanna and I'm not gonna. And what's even best about that, you can't make me, right? And sometimes they show up like that, and I'm just kind of throwing some characteristics and ways of being out. It may be a number of reasons what has people find themselves in these boxes. Um, but what I want to do is have us look at where do we find ourselves when we're confronted with various circumstances, situations, and conditions that are unfavorable. And what I would like for you to do, and I'm going to move these through, um, is take a look at some of these different circumstances that we may be confronted with. And when you think about them, think about where do you naturally gravitate when you experience one of these. I know for me, there's two that, it's actually three. I'm going to start with the one that may seem not so obvious. Joyful, I go to, it, it's almost like I'm waiting for the shoe to drop. If things are going too well, it's like, I really don't know. Somebody's trying to set me up somewhere, right? So I may find myself, and this is interesting about how I think about things. Sometimes I may find myself in the not box um, or the permissive box because I'm not necessarily clear I can replicate it again. Like, oh man, this went too well. This ain't right, right? So the joyful one, you would think like, hey, that's gonna have me moving all in full direction. Not for me. The next one is frustration. When I get frustrated, I definitely go to a two box um, because I feel like I have to control a situation, like, and I don't want it to get further out of hand. And I'm going to talk about what some of the impacts are when I move more in that space. But how about for some of you, where do you gravitate when you're faced with some of these? And it may not be something that's listed here on this slide. You can say one of those triggers, I will call it, that when you're confronted with it, it has you go to one of these, and it may even take you to the with box, one of these quadrants. And you can type it in the chat box. I would love for someone, we've been with each other for about 15 minutes, so we're an item now. I would love for someone to feel a little courageous and come off mute and share where they gravitate towards. Just one. Who's a brave soul? Miss Amrish? I can't hear you. No, ma'am. Lord, have mercy. Mm, 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 mm. Just type it in the chat. I just want to hear from you so bad. Thank you for being courageous at first. So you all can type it in the chat.
And I can jump. I was just struck by, so our team is coming from one of our partner middle schools where we were earlier today, and just taking back to that space of being an early teacher and thinking about when authority is challenged. And that took me back and just realizing, reflecting on kind of my own pull of then going to that not box when authority is challenged, not in like a necessarily intentionally hard, but just kind of that result of them wanting to pull back and just kind of go, okay, well, I'll just mind my own business. So I was made aware of that own pull in myself today, being in one of our middle schools.
Mm-hmm. And again, you also have the chat feature to share what's there for you. So what we're going to do, we're going to move into our activity phase because this is just an expanded. This slide is the warm-up slide. So I gave you an opportunity to get your stretch in because now we're getting ready to get a little deeper. And if you pull a hamstring, it wasn't because of me. I gave you an opportunity to get that take advantage of that warm-up. But this next task is just looking at the social discipline window and what does it make available to you as a tool for access, insight, action, and producing results. So I'm going to walk through this with you, and I'm going to share from these particular three components: locating yourself, communicating where you found yourself, and being insightfully straight about it. And then how do I recalibrate? How do I pull the nose up if it's a dive? And actually, if I'm operating at a level, I actually can take myself to another level, right? So when I talked about being frustrated, and there are times when um, my son Allende does some things and I get frustrated and I immediately go to the toolbox. Oh, Emily, did you share those? These you all have some handouts that we shared in the chat, so you can actually click on those and open those up, and open these up. So I find myself inside of the toolbox, um, and what is the impact on me when this circumstance I'm faced with? Well, one, my level of patience gets short, right? Uh, I'm no longer the flexible, dad. I become more inflexible. My communication gets short. And in the moment when I'm being very two with my son, if I were to or looking, there's some level of loss and vitality in myself. And what that cost me is the connection with my son. Because when I'm in that space of being frustrated and short patience, it decreases the level of guidance I can provide, some other possibility that I can share to communicate. And then the affinity is lost as well, right? So that's the impact that it has on me. What do I think is missing in my way of being that if it was present, it would make a difference? When I think about it, being patient, having some level of curiosity about the situation. Well, hey, what is it that has it be that way? So I can listen. Um, and then how I'm speaking about the situation makes a difference as well. And I am my father's son, so my father was very fiery, right? He used to say, "Boy, you too wrong to be right." And even when I was right, I was wrong. So I have some of that very honestly, right? So what would be missing is being able to create a space where there's open dialogue and communication that allows my son to show up and communicate. So I can even hear and listen for, oh, what I thought was not the case. And I can now put in what's needed to make the difference to have it move to the next level or move the ball further along in an optimal direction. What am I committed to and what would that look like? Well, I'm committed to having a healthy relationship with my son. And what that would look like for me is making sure that my communication is clear. I say a lot of things sometimes. Sometimes he's just shaking his head like, I know when my father used to say things to me, I just started doing stuff. And he was like, that's not what you're supposed to do. And I'm like, well, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing. And I just do more. And he was like, that's not it, right? So making sure my communication is clear, and then following up to make sure with some clarifying questions, did you understand what I'm saying? And then checking for understanding, and then putting a system in place. Because sometimes I'll share something once, and that one time is just not enough. Like right now, Allende's learning to play the trumpet, and you know, because we have a history, going through a lesson once, I said we have to put together a system, right? So a system for him to follow that's gonna one ensure that he is feeling good about playing it. There's some quality he's learning, and I'm not like I'm not chewing on him. I'm not chewing him. There's a with process, and he's growing, and he's feeling a little confident about learning a new instrument and not knowing what he's doing as he's blowing into that little mouthpiece and learning his embouchure. But at any rate, I wanted to take some time to move through that. I wanted to give you all an opportunity to look at these, locate yourself, communicate what there is for you, and then the recalibration. Is there a brave soul? Oh, before I even do that, let me ask you what I shared. Um, what did you see for yourself in what I shared? That we can actually start there. What did you see for yourself? Who would like to share? Because then you can talk about me. Well, what I saw is blank, but you would be looking from your life. Who would like to share? You see what the trigger is, or what that area is, where you go in the social discipline window, what's the impact, what's missing, and how do we transform or shift that space? Who would like to share? What did you see for yourself in what I shared? So the next question would be, who is willing to work with me to move through these three components: locating yourself, communicating about that, and then how do we shift and recalibrate? Everybody put your hands down. Oh, Miss Natasha.
Keep your hand up.
All right. Put the hand up. Put the hand up. Thank you so much. All the way from the left coast. So if you can come off mute.
Yeah,
All right.
I need help.
What'd you say?
I need help.
Excellent. And you don't need help. Not at all. And I know what I know what you're saying. What's your question?
Oh, I guess, yeah, just like I shared in the chat, it's a lot to process, and I just wanted to say, like, hearing you go through that example, like broken down into each of those steps helps a bit. So thank you.
Got it. And what difference did that make for you? What did that have you see or discover for yourself?
Um, I I'm not sure yet. I feel like I'm just processing this really slowly because it feels new thinking about just using this framework. But for me, like right now, what's really helpful are these three steps, locate, communicate, and then recalibrate.
Excellent, excellent. This is actually having us become more socially and emotionally developed. These are some of the steps that come out of SEL, being very
Oh,
self-aware.
sir.
Yes. And what this makes available, again, the social discipline window.
You're muted, sir.
Yeah, you're muted. Mr. Turner, we can't hear you.
I think we just lost your sound, Andre. Sorry.
No worries. And the interesting thing, Natasha, is the insight what someone would think is the prize, but it's not. Once we have access with the tool and we have the insight, we now want to be an action about it. And we call that actionable insights. And that's where we get the breakthroughs. So the being in a thinking space, we get it. We want people to go out on the step out on the skinny branches. And I promise you the branch won't break. Where do you go? And which one of these here speaks to you, and where do you go in the social discipline window?
I think I go to the not corner. That's like my go-to strategy for dealing with most things, is just to try to like avoid. And I'm learning to come back, like to stay in that corner, less time to notice it more quickly, and then bring myself.
Hello? Can you hear me? Is my mic working?
Yeah, it is.
I think we're being bombed.
We're working on it. Go ahead, keep going.
No worries. And when you notice that, what do you think is missing that if it was present would make a difference for you? And when I say what's missing, for an example, sometimes when we talk about finances and we say what's missing, people say money is missing. That's not the kind of missing I'm talking about. It's like, where do we have to we get the opportunity to look over here and see what can we generate to make a difference in the space that we're working in. And what would you see is missing that would make a difference to shift you or process you out of the knot and maybe somewhere else in the quadrant?
The things I'm grabbing onto right now are just using my breath to help regulate my nervous system, and then just like building stamina for staying in a difficult situation.
And if you're using your breath and using stamina to stay in a situation, what does that make available to you?
More availability for engagement.
All right.
And more calmness in that availability.
And when you're being calm and engaged, what is that like?
I tell you, like, to be honest, right now, it feels like hard work.
Got it.
It takes effort.
Got it. Got it. And this is the beautiful thing about this, and I thank you for being so authentic about this, because when we discover something, notice I'm saying we have access to it, and what's next to do is to train and develop it so we can expand it. And that's that part when we talked about the fourth agreement, accept and expect non-closure. The effort that we're bringing, they call it that learning curve. As we're continually training and developing ourselves, the effort decreases because the commitment that we put into it, we now have some momentum as we're moving forward. So what you're sharing is like spot on, and it makes a whole bunch of sense. For how many of you who heard what Natasha shared, it makes sense to you? You can put a 1 in the chat box. You can raise your hand. And Natasha just wants you to really see again, also with restorative approaches, it is, I call it a social field of synergy. So you're sharing, it may seem like this is a Natasha phenomenon. How many of us can relate to what Natasha was saying? And that's put our hands up in the box, right? So why restorative practices are also important, because the connections that we're making, it's creating an inspiration where it gives other folks an ability to be themselves and move forward.
I think I can add on a little bit for just Natasha. A lot of what you had said, I really identify with, and Miss or Mr. or Miss or they, them, Amrush was also just kind of like coming from that like provider background, just sitting within the School of Social Work. And a lot of those times, as we work with school partners and students and people, just when I encounter burnout, a lot of that time too, thinking about how do you then respond. And for me, like moving to a more punitive space, and that it's two, and that I'm looking at like high expectations and not necessarily thinking through that support. And that's coming more from my position of being overwhelmed, of not like, I can't control all of the variables. So I'm going to start saying like, can you do this? And can you do this? And you can do this, and not necessarily following up to make sure that people have the support to be successful in that. And so like, that's a good flag for me in that moment of looking at the social discipline window and going like, getting more done isn't necessarily better if we're just barely surviving as a team. So thinking about and going back and really checking in on the needs of those people, and how do you set those high expectations, but making sure that people have the support they need to be successful in that setting. So thinking about those that mean from like a clinician and a social work lens as well.
And then the last question that I'll ask, when you mentioned the breath, the stamina, increasing engagement, and generating a space of calm. This may sound silly, but who's responsible for generating that?
You are.
Right, right. And this is what makes this mindfulness and restorative and healing centered engagement so valuable, because it really gives us an authentic and true sense of our power. Many instances we're looking, and this is not like it's, an absolute, for something to come outside or on high. And when we take a moment and locate ourselves and then get insightfully straight about it, something is going to emerge that we begin to see and discover. And then we can begin shifting things. And when we're in that practice and training and developing ourselves, we actually get stronger in that area. And we're worth it and we deserve it. So I just want to thank you, Natasha, for being brave and sharing. For you all in the audience, what difference did Natasha sharing make for you? What are you getting out of that? Who would like to share? And what did it, how does it impact you when you're looking at your life? Mr. Harrison?
I can share. I think what I'm learning in just being my leadership role now is because the type of employees that you're trying to support, it's different now. So I'm learning now that I have to be, I'm like counselor, I'm all these things. So I'm learning that I have to really be mindful of my personal triggers and really go back and be a little more patient and kind of almost remember, like, going from scratch of sometimes people just don't know,
Yeah.
and I think I'm there. I feel like I've gone more, I've passed the fright or flirt fight. I've tried, I've kind of touched all those sometimes, but I'm just past all that. Like, now I just got to deal with it because you just never know what the day's going to look like. But I'm realizing that I really have to check myself and not project what I feel that people should do, and really go back to the basics of, I may have to do A, B, C, and D. I already see Z, but you don't even see the A right now. So I have to learn to kind of get myself back to the basis, like when I first started out, and be willing to go there and really bring the team along so that way they can feel more supported and understanding. I have used so many box of tissues lately for people, because not only are they dealing with life, but it's hard for them to balance the life and work at the same time. So I think it's just, this whole thing is really stretching you, um, to just not just a personal, but in leadership itself. It's a different mindset we have to have because the workers' mindset is different. I feel
Absolutely.
like it's such a gap, but I'm not that old, but I feel like I'm just in such a gap. Um,
Mhm. And
you
and
know,
it's a growth gap. And what's interesting in this moment in time, workers are becoming more comprehensive.
mhm,
So we're not just a one, these polar workers. We're really becoming more intersectional and interdependent and interdisciplinary in the way that we're working. And the other, what I was hearing from you is a level of acceptance. You say you're not in the fight, the flight, the freeze, right? And it was almost like, I looked at you, it was almost like some level of exhale with some level of acceptance, and that's freeing. That's what I'm saying. That the work doesn't come any less, but you're taking it head on, and that's the mark of leadership. So I want to acknowledge you for that.
thank you.
But thank you.
I feel like it's even, it's almost that level you have to have that acceptance just now for just retention. Because one wrong thing that a team member may not feel, they're about to go. So I'm learning that it's important for me to accept it just so I can make sure I, am willing to keep a team. It's, and some people just are not meant to keep. But I feel like just retention alone has to look different. That has to be part of that. This is part of keeping a solid group of, effective, and to get the product that you're looking for. You want production. You have to show that level of, okay, we're here with this. Now, what are we gonna do with it?
And Miss Youngblood, again, you're operating at the epitome of leadership, because you're still focusing your sights on your staff and the people that you work with, right? Which is why restorative approaches are so important, because now it's time to turn and
Mhm.
give to ourselves, right? So we can have the capacity, the endurance, and the stamina to be able to hold space for people. And it's a process that sometimes we don't allow ourselves, or we don't give ourselves permission to process through. It's like, I just got to be at the finish line. No, it's important for me to develop and strengthen myself so that I can reach the finish lines. Like Emily was sharing, there's no point in getting to the finish line and there's no gas and there's nothing else to give. So we want to look at some self-care suggestions, and these are just literally suggestions. And then I want to hear from you all. What are some things that you can do that fortifies and reinforces some rituals that you engage in? But I'm going to go over here to some of these suggestions. And again, the suggestions are in a process. Many times we want to go right to the finish line. These self-care suggestions are important once we take a moment, locate ourselves, say something about it, write it down, or give ourselves a reflective mirror. Again, that social discipline window, getting that reflection, seeing something, and then something emerges that allows me to see the next action to take, the next natural organic action that is custom suited for me. So journaling may be setting some boundaries, organizing our space, how we phrase things. Sometimes I say words, or we say words create world when we use virtues languaging and effective statements or positive teacher talk. Developing a growth mindset, which just has us be flexible, right? Especially with administration, things are always happening, and again, we're doing more with less. So a growth mindset allows me to be uh, adaptive and flexible for whatever is coming, and it creates some empathy and compassion. Give some affirmations, do some mirror work, get in that mirror. Dre, you the best, you the greatest. Or whatever that you do. Some chair yoga. There's this thing called power postures where you take these poses and neurologically the body begins to take on the the coding of those power postures. Uh, Google power postures. Make sure that we're hydrated. Take some breaks. Um, we have a hold the talking piece. If you're familiar with restorative practices, it's something that is important to you, that you care about, that you use when you host circles. Um, Practice positive self-talk. We don't want to have that stinking thinking and the negative talks and put downs, right? We say things, we say things to ourselves that if somebody said it to us, we will punch them in the mouth. So we got to make sure we just talk nice to ourselves. Seek out a mentor, an experienced person that we trust that is going to give us some support. Turn on the phone, look at some YouTube or some TED Talks, watch some comedy. But these are a few of them. Say no, create some boundaries, and accept and expect non-closure. What are some things or rituals that you all engage in that gives you a moment of reprieve? You can type those in the chat box.
I think for me, when I'm really stressed, because we can walk around our campus, sometimes I just need to take a walk, or I look out the window. If I'm really stressed, I just need a Pepsi and I just sit down, somewhere. Or sometimes I'm a talker, so I have to get it out. So I'll find a office, because sometimes in administration it's a lonely place because you don't have too many people to process things with. So I have key people that I can just say, if I see their office door open, I'm walking in, like, okay, you got a minute, and I need to process all of this. So I really take that time. Or I'm very vocal, so I'll say, okay, I'm feeling triggered, so I need to walk away, and I'll be back. Give me 15 minutes and I'll be back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I saw a few others lighting up in the chat box. And we want to make sure these are some things that we may be able to do immediately or ready to handle, or as close to ground zero as we possibly can be. Because again, knowing how hectic the day can be, we want to really be radical about our self-care, even if it's 120 seconds, 2 minutes, something that we can do in its immediacy, that can give us a moment for a little bit longer. Again, share those in the chat box.
I can do one that I've started in the last 2 weeks of going to think of saying something nice to yourself. Also, in the spirit of being in the with box, realizing saying something nice to a coworker sometimes helps too. So I've started just taking Post-it notes and writing 3 sentences to a coworker a couple times a week. And just by way of naming like specific things that I am thankful for in them. And that has helped with my morale in a couple of moments.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emily. And thank you all for sharing via chat, coming off your mute and sharing. When we utilize the social discipline window, again, it provides access. The access gives us the insight. When we take action, it becomes actionable insights. And then that gives us an opportunity to provide the kind of care that is needed, that has us give us the sense of health and wellness that is really functional, not conceptual and not intellectual. I really wanted to make this something that you can look at and right in the moment, it's something that you can walk away with and you can do something in the next 60 seconds, not that you have to be conceptual and intellectual about it. I'm going to put this screen up, the next screen up. We have in 2 days, Shantae is going to be presenting on socially engineered trauma. I also have a QR code to the left that I would love for you to get your phones and take a picture of this QR code and complete the feedback form. Your feedback is valuable and we utilize it. And while you're doing that, I always take this moment to acknowledge our team. We have some colleagues here. I always start with Shantae. She introduced herself. She's our fearless leader, leading the way. She's our executive director. Dr. Wendy Shy, I'd like to acknowledge. Becky Davis. I'd like to acknowledge Emily Ains Messinger, Nakoma Mosley. We have Corey Fractions, who's represented for the Community Schools Coordinators. We have Portia, who represents for our wellness team. We have Asia, who also is one of our team members. We have Cassandra, who's a part of our Next Gen Scholars. And we have the Promise Heights conglomerate that are just doing an amazing job. When you see one, you see the whole team. And if I did forget someone, I want to apologize. But I just want you to know that when you see us, when you see one, it's a huge team that makes this effort possible.